Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human ship New Horizons and watched the massive space station grow larger on the screen. The Galactic Council's home base was beautiful. It sparkled like a jewel against the black of space, with towers that twisted up toward the stars and lights that danced across its surface like fireflies. Jake had seen it many times before. This was his 4th year coming here, asking the same question and getting the same answer. Each time, the aliens smiled their cold smiles and said no. Each time, they made humans feel small and stupid. "Captain," said Lisa Harper, walking up beside him. She was the ship's diplomat, the one who did all the talking when they met with the aliens. "I have the report ready for today's meeting." Jake took the data pad from her and read it quickly. It was the same as always. The humans wanted to join the Galactic Council as full members. The aliens would say no. It would give reasons that sounded nice, but meant humans were not good enough. "7th time," Jake said quietly. "Yes, sir. 7th time we've asked. 7th time they'll say no." Jake looked at the other people on his bridge. They were good people, smart people. They had traveled across the galaxy to be here, to speak for all of humanity. But the aliens treated them like children playing dress-up. The communication system beeped. A face appeared on the screen. It was tall and thin with blue skin and eyes like silver coins. This was Ambassador Kethra of the Zephyrians. The Zephyrians thought they were the most beautiful and smart race in the galaxy. "Captain Morrison," Kethra said in a voice like singing wind, "the Council will see you now. Please dock at Bay 7. "Thank you, Ambassador," Jake replied. The screen went dark. Dr. Kevin Blake walked onto the bridge carrying a thick folder. Kevin studied aliens for a living. He knew more about their cultures than most humans knew about their own neighbors. "Captain, I need to show you something before." "The meeting," Kevin said. His face was serious, the way it got when he found something important. They went to Jake's office. Kevin spread papers across the desk. There were pictures of alien cities, charts with numbers, and reports written in small text. "I've been studying their societies for 3 years," Kevin began. "What we see in these meetings, it's all fake. The Zephyrians, the Vorthans, the crystalline hegemony, they're not peaceful because they're better than us. They're peaceful because they crush anyone who fights back." Jake looked at the pictures. They showed beautiful cities with clean streets and happy-looking aliens. But Kevin pointed to other pictures, ones taken in secret. These showed prison camps, factories where aliens worked until they died, and mass graves. "The Zephyrians have slave camps on 12 worlds," Kevin continued. "The Vorthans control their people with drugs in the water supply. The crystalline hegemony simply kills anyone who disagrees with them. They call this civilization. Why haven't we reported this?" Jake asked. "To who? The Council?" "They all know. This is how they keep peace. Total control. No freedom. No choice. Step out of line, and you disappear." Jake felt sick. For 3 years, humans had been trying to join this group. They had been polite and respectful. They had followed every rule and custom. And all along, these aliens had been monsters wearing nice masks. "There's more," Kevin said. He pulled out another folder. "I've been tracking their military. The ships they show us are not their real warships. Those are hidden. And Captain, their real military is designed for one thing: keeping their own people in line. They have almost no ability to fight an outside enemy." Before Jake could respond, alarms started ringing throughout the ship. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Harper's voice came over the speakers. "Captain to the bridge immediately. Priority 1 emergency." Jake and Kevin ran to the bridge. The main screen showed chaos. Ships were exploding. Space stations were on fire. Alien voices screamed in panic across all communication channels. "What's happening?" Jake demanded. "The Korthik swarm," Lisa reported. "They've broken through the outer defenses. They're attacking everything in the rim sectors." Jake had heard of the Korthik. They were like space locusts. They traveled in huge swarms, eating everything in their path. Most people thought they were just scary stories. "How many ships?" Jake asked. "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. They're destroying entire worlds." On the screen, they watched as a Korthik bioship, looking like a giant insect made of metal and flesh, tore apart a space station. Pieces of the station floated away like broken toys. "What's the council doing?" Jake asked. Lisa checked her console. They're evacuating their own people and leaving everyone else." Jake stared at the screen. Millions of beings were about to die, and the so-called civilized races were running away. Only their own people mattered. Everyone else could burn. An idea began to form in Jake's mind. It was dangerous. It went against every order Earth had given him. But as he watched the massacre on the screen, he knew what humans had to do. "Lisa, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we're responding to the crisis." "Sir, we don't have permission from the Council." "I don't care about their permission anymore." Jake turned to face his crew. "Kevin, you're right. We've been trying to join the wrong kind of civilization. Maybe it's time to show them what real civilization looks like." He looked back at the screen where ships full of innocent beings were, dying while their protectors ran away. "Set course for the outer rim. Maximum speed." "Sir, we're just one ship." Jake smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "We're one human ship." "That might be enough." Admiral Susan Grant stood in the command center of the human fleet and watched her ships jump into hyperspace. They were not pretty ships like the aliens had. They were built for work, not for show. Cargo haulers, exploration vessels, and mining. Ships had all been turned into warships in just 2 weeks. The humans had moved fast when Captain Morrison's message reached Earth. Every ship that could fly was loaded with weapons and volunteers. Susan had never seen anything like it. When people heard that innocent beings were dying, they lined up to help. Farmers became gunners. Teachers became pilots. Store clerks became Marines. "Admiral," called Commander Amy Watson from her station. "We're getting reports from the outer rim. It's bad." Susan walked over to look at Amy's screen. The reports were terrible. Whole cities were gone. The Korthik bioships were not just killing people. They were harvesting them, taking them apart to make more ships and weapons. What about the Galactic Council forces? Still pulling back to protect their core worlds. They're abandoning everything beyond the Middle Rim. Susan felt anger rise in her chest. These aliens talked about civilization and culture, but when real danger came, they only saved themselves. The Novans, the Helix people, the Wanderer clans, all the small races were left to die. "Time to first contact?" 6 hours, Admiral," Susan nodded. In 6 hours, they would find out if humans could really make a difference, or if they were just going to die trying. The first world they reached was Talar 3. It was home to the Novans, a peaceful people who looked like tall, thin humans with golden skin. Their cities were works of art, with buildings that grew like plants and rivers that ran through the streets. Now those cities were burning. Colonel Ryan Murphy led the ground assault. He had been a teacher before the war started. Now he commanded 3,000 Marines who had never seen real combat. But as their shuttles dropped toward the planet, Ryan felt strangely calm. "Remember," he told his troops over the radio, "we're not here to win pretty. We're here to save lives. Use everything you've got." The Korthik bioships looked like giant beetles made of metal and bone. They had weapons that fired living acid and claws that could cut through steel. The Galactic Council's military doctrine: said you should fight them from long range with precision weapons. Rian's Marines did the opposite. They got close. Really close. They used explosives in ways that made no sense to alien military minds. They turned civilian equipment into weapons. Most shocking of all, when a Marine was about to die, he would often take enemies with him on purpose. Captain Tony Rodriguez led one squad into a Corthic hive ship. The aliens watching from orbit were horrified. No civilized being would enter. Enemy territory on foot. It was too dangerous, too unpredictable. But Tony and his Marines moved through the ship like they were born for it. They used knives and bare hands when they ran out of bullets. They set traps using nothing but rope and explosives. They fought in ways that the Corthic had never seen before. "This is insane," radioed a Zephyrian observer. "They're fighting like animals." "No," replied his commander, watching the tactical display. "They're fighting like humans." In space, Commander Amy Watson coordinated the fleet battle. The human ships were smaller than the Corthic bioships, but they moved differently. Where alien warships fought in careful formations, human ships scattered and attacked from all directions at once. When the used Denver was surrounded by 5 enemy ships, Captain Bill Carter did something that made the alien observers sick. He aimed his ship at the largest enemy vessel and accelerated to ramming speed. "Carter, what are you doing?" Amy radioed. "Saving the colony ships," Carter replied calmly. "Tell my wife I kept my promise." The Denver hit the Corthic command ship. At full speed, both vessels exploded, but the blast cleared a path for the civilian evacuees to escape. Dr. Kevin Blake watched the battle from the medical bay, where he was helping treat wounded Novans. The aliens were amazed that humans would risk their lives for people they had never met. "Why do they do this?" asked a Novan healer. "Your people gain nothing from saving us." Kevin looked up from managing a child's arm. "We don't do it for gain. We do it because it's right." The healer stared at him like he had spoken in a foreign language. The battle for Talar III lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Corthic were retreating and the Novan cities were saved. But the cost had been high. Nearly half the human ground forces were dead or wounded. Susan Grant walked through the medical tents set up on the planet's surface. She saw Marines who had lost arms still trying to help with evacuation. She saw pilots with burns covering their faces volunteering for the next mission. "Admiral," called Colonel Murphy. His left arm was in a sling, and he had a bandage over one eye. "The Corthic are regrouping. Intelligence says they're planning to hit the Helios sector next. How many ships do we have left?" 60% combat ready. "But Admiral, the crews want to keep fighting." Susan looked around at her battered fleet. These ships had been cargo haulers and pleasure craft just weeks ago. Now they were warships crewed by people who had never wanted to be soldiers. But they were winning. Reports were coming in from across the outer rim. Wherever humans appeared, the Corthic advance stopped. It was not because human technology was better. The alien observers were starting to understand something much more frightening. Humans were not fighting like civilized beings. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose and everything to protect. They used tactics that required sacrifice. They took risks that no sane military would consider, and it was working. "Set course for the Helios sector," Susan ordered, "and send a message to Earth. Tell them to send everything that can fly. We're going to need it." As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, alien military analysts across the galaxy studied the battle recordings. What they saw challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare and civilization. These humans had not lost control. Every seemingly crazy attack had been perfectly calculated. Every sacrifice had served a larger purpose. They were not fighting like animals. They were fighting like something much more dangerous. They were fighting like humans. who had finally stopped pretending to be civilized. General Patricia Cole looked at the holographic map floating above her command table. Red dots showed where the Korthik were attacking. Blue dots showed human positions. Green dots showed worlds they had saved. There were a lot of green dots now. In 3 weeks, the human fleet had liberated 12 worlds in the Vega sector. Each victory had cost them dearly. Ships were running out of ammunition. Medical supplies were almost gone. And too many good people had died. But they kept fighting. "General," said her aide, Lieutenant Danny Kim. "Message from the Galactic Council. They want to discuss proper military protocols with us." Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They want to discuss protocols while people are dying? Tell them we're busy." Dr. Marie Evans worked in the field hospital on Kepler 7-1. Of the worlds they had just freed, she had been a children's doctor on Earth. Now she spent her days treating wounded soldiers and traumatized refugees. The things she saw made her understand why the aliens were so confused by human behavior. Yesterday, Sergeant Andy White had held a position for 6 hours against impossible odds. When she asked him why, he said it was to give the alien families time to evacuate. "But they're not your people," Marie had said while treating his wounds. Andy looked at her like she had asked why water was wet. "They're people. That's enough." The alien refugees were starting to understand this too. The Helix people, who looked like walking crystals, had never seen beings fight for others without expecting payment. The Wanderer clans, nomads who lived on space stations, could not believe humans would die to protect their children. But the biggest shock came at Helios Station. The station was a massive structure that orbited a dying star. It was home to 3 million crystalline refugees who had fled their homeworld when the Korthik attacked. Now the swarm had found them. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Foster led the defense with 800 Marines. The Korthik came at them with everything they had. Bioships the size of cities. Warriors that could tear through steel with their bare claws. Weapons that turned living beings into soup. The math was simple. 800 humans against 50,000 Korthik. It should have been over in minutes. It lasted 72 hours. Patricia watched the battle through satellite feeds. She saw humans do things that would give alien military commanders nightmares. They turned the station's life support system into a weapon. They used maintenance tunnels to attack from impossible angles. When they ran out of bullets, they used tools and pipes and anything else they could find. "General," called Commander Amy Watson from her position in orbit. "Foster's asking for evacuation ships for the refugees. What about his people?" Amy was quiet for a moment. "He's not asking for evacuation for his people, ma'am." Patricia understood. Foster knew his Marines were going to die. But he was going to make sure those 3 million refugees lived. The galactic news networks were broadcasting the battle across the galaxy. Beings who had never heard of humans before watched 800 soldiers fight an impossible battle. They saw Marines share their last rations with alien children. They saw wounded humans crawl back to their positions rather than abandon their posts. Most shocking of all, they heard Foster's final transmission. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Sam Foster of Earth Defense Forces." His voice crackled across the communication channels. "To anyone listening, I want you to understand something. We could have been conquerors. We had the power. We had the weapons. We chose to be protectors instead." The transmission was breaking up as the Korthik closed in on the command center. "My people have been playing nice for 3 years. We followed your rules. We smiled when you insulted us. We pretended to be weak because we thought that's what civilization meant. But we were wrong." Explosions could be heard in the background. Real civilization isn't about being polite. It's about making the hard choices. It's about standing between the darkness and the light, even when it costs everything. The sound of gunfire grew louder. We're not doing this for glory. We're not doing this for territory or resources or power. We're doing this because someone has to. And apparently, we're the only ones willing to pay the price. Foster's voice was getting weaker. Remember this when you judge what civilization really means. Remember that humans chose to die for people we barely knew because it was the right thing to do. And remember that being civilized was always just a privilege we extended to you. The transmission cut to static. Captain Rachel Green was the only survivor of Helios Station. A Zephyrian patrol found her 3 days later, drifting in an escape pod. She had been unconscious when Foster's men loaded her into the pod and launched. She woke up to find that everyone she had served with was dead, but the 3 million refugees were alive. The rescue of Rachel Green was broadcast live across the galactic networks. When the Zephyrian commander asked her why humans had sacrificed themselves for aliens, her answer shocked the galaxy. Because that's what people do, she said simply. Real people. Good people. They protect those who can't protect themselves, even if it costs them everything. The Zephyrian commander, a veteran of countless battles, found himself unable to speak. Across the galaxy, alien leaders watched the recordings from Helios Station. Military analysts studied human tactics and found them terrifying in their effectiveness. Every seemingly desperate move had been carefully planned. Every sacrifice had served a greater purpose. The humans had not been fighting wildly. They had been fighting with perfect discipline and control. The scary part was not that they had lost control. The scary part was that they had been in complete control the entire time. Admiral Susan Grant received reports from across the front lines. Human casualties were at 40%. They were running low on everything they needed to fight, but morale was higher than ever. Admiral, reported Captain Tony Rodriguez, now commanding the defense of the Antares system. The Korthik are pulling back. Intelligence says they're retreating beyond the galactic rim. Susan felt a mixture of relief and sadness. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. So many good people had died to save beings they had never met. What's the Council's response? She asked. Tony was quiet for a moment. They're scared, Admiral. They're scared of us. Susan understood why. For 3 years, humans had pretended to be harmless. They had smiled and been polite and asked nicely for permission to join galactic society. All the while, they had been hiding their true capabilities. Now the mask was off. The galaxy had seen what humans could do when they stopped playing nice, and it terrified them. The question now was what would happen next. The war was over. The Korthik swarm had retreated beyond the galactic rim for the first time in recorded history. Their bioships limped away into the dark spaces between stars, carrying the memory of what human determination could accomplish. But the real war was just beginning. Director Helen Ross sat in her office on Earth, reading intelligence reports that would change everything. Helen had been watching the galaxy for longer than most people knew. While diplomats smiled and made nice speeches, she had been preparing for the day when the mask would have to come off. That day had arrived. Send them in, she told her assistant. Door opened and 3 people entered. Admiral Susan Grant, still wearing her battle-scarred uniform. Captain Jake Morrison, the man who had started it all. And Dr. Kevin Blake, who had been the first to see through the galaxy's lies. Congratulations, Helen said. You've terrified the entire galaxy. Susan sat down heavily. She looked tired. The war had aged her 10 years in 3 months. That wasn't the goal. No, but it was inevitable. Helen activated a holographic display. Let me show you what we've learned. The display showed star maps, fleet positions, and technical specifications. But these were not the numbers the galaxy had been showing humans for 3 years. These were the real numbers. The Zephyrians have been lying about their military strength, Helen began. Their actual fleet is 60% smaller than they claimed. The Vorthan Collective has been faking their technology levels. And the crystalline hegemony has been using slave labor to build their ships. Jake leaned forward. How long have you known this? Since the beginning. We've been monitoring their communications, analyzing their technology, and mapping their real capabilities. Jake, we could have conquered half the galaxy any time in the past 3 years. The room was quiet. Susan spoke first. Why didn't you tell us? Because we were hoping we wouldn't need to. We were hoping they would accept us as equals, and we could build something better together. Helen's voice was bitter. Instead, they treated us like children and left millions to die when real danger appeared. Commander Nick Barnes entered the room carrying a stack of data pads. Nick had been analyzing alien technology during the war. What he found had shocked even Helen. The weapons they've been selling us, Nick said. They're toys. Deliberately weakened versions of their real equipment. They've been making sure we stayed dependent on them. He activated another display. But here's the interesting part. Our primitive human technology is actually more advanced than theirs. In most areas, we've been building better ships, better weapons, and better defenses. We just didn't realize it because we were comparing ourselves to their fake specifications. Kevin shook his head. They made us think we were backwards. It gets worse, Helen said. Show them the population analysis, Nick. Nick pulled up another chart. The civilized races? They're not really civilized. The Zephyrians maintain order through fear and genetic manipulation. The Vorthans use mind control drugs. The crystalline hegemony just kills anyone who disagrees with them. Their peaceful societies are built on oppression and murder. Susan felt sick. And we've been trying to join them for 3 years. You've been trying to join what you thought they were, Helen corrected. What they pretended to be. But now they know what we really are, and they're terrified. The communication system chimed. Helen answered it. Send her in. Ambassador Carolwright entered the room. Caral had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Council for 2 years. She had endured countless insults and rejections while trying to get humanity accepted. How did the Council react to our demands? Helen asked. Carol's face was grim. Panic. Pure panic. They're calling emergency sessions. Some species are talking about forming a coalition against us. Others want to surrender immediately. What did you tell them? The truth. That humanity wants full membership in the Galactic Council with veto power over military decisions. And if they refuse, we'll withdraw from galactic affairs completely. Jake frowned. That's not much of a threat. Why would they care if we leave? Carol smiled, but it was not a happy smile. Because they know what we learned during the war. We're the only species in the galaxy that can actually fight. Their militaries are designed to control their own populations, not defend against outside threats. She activated the wall display. The Outer Rim attack wasn't the first time the Korthic probed galactic defenses. They've been testing us for decades, every time the galactic forces retreated and hoped the problem would go away. Helen nodded. They've been living in a fantasy. They thought civilization meant the absence of conflict. They never prepared for real war because they never expected to fight one. Until now, Susan said quietly. Until now, Helen agreed. They've seen human military doctrine in action. They know we have weapons and tactics they can't match. More importantly, they know we have something they don't have. What's that? The will to fight for principles instead of just survival. They can't understand why we die for strangers. To them, it's insane, but it's also the most powerful force in the galaxy. Nick pulled up intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Their analysts have been studying our tactics. They can't figure out how we coordinate so well without their command and control systems. They don't understand that humans can think for themselves and make decisions in the field. They're used to soldiers who need orders for everything, Susan added. Our Marines were making tactical decisions that their generals would never think of. Helen stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the lights of New Geneva, where the human government was meeting in emergency session. The galaxy is going to change, she said. The question is whether we guide that change or let chaos take over. Carol spoke up. There's something else. The smaller species, the ones we saved during the war, they're asking to join us. The Novans, the Helix people, the Wanderer clans. They want human protection. Against who? Jake asked. Against the Galactic Council. They're afraid that when this is over, the Council will punish them for accepting human help. Helen turned back to the group. So we have a choice. We can try to work within the existing system, or we can build something new. What do you recommend? Susan asked. Helen smiled. I recommend we do what humans do best. We take the hard path. We tell the galaxy the truth about what civilization really means. And we make them choose between real peace and the fake peace they've been living in. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Jake spoke. What if they choose war? Helen's smile faded. Then we'll give them war. And we'll make sure they understand the difference between fighting for conquest and fighting for survival. Outside the window, the stars looked different now. They were no longer distant lights marking unexplored territories. They were points of light in a galaxy that had learned to fear the name human. The question now was whether that fear would lead to wisdom or to destruction. 6 months had passed since the Korthic War ended. The galaxy was different now, not just because of the battles that had been fought, but because of the truths that had been revealed. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in his new office at Galactic Defense Command. The title still felt strange. 6 months ago, he had been a ship captain begging for scraps of respect from alien diplomats. Now he commanded the combined military forces of 47 species. The change had not been easy. Admiral, called Lieutenant Commander Lisa Harper, entering with a stack of reports. The integration training is running behind schedule. Jake looked at the reports. They showed the same problems every day. Alien officers who could not understand human tactics. Soldiers from different species who had never worked together. Most difficult of all, beings who had never learned to think for themselves in combat. What's the main issue today? The Zephyrian commanders are refusing to authorize the sacrifice protocols, Lisa replied. They say it's too dangerous to allow individual soldiers to make life or death decisions. Jake rubbed his temples. This was the fundamental problem. The galaxy's militaries were built on strict control and rigid hierarchy. Human military doctrine required soldiers who could adapt, improvise, and sacrifice when needed. Set up a meeting with Commander Valkyrie. I'll explain it to him again. Dr. Lisa Harper had been promoted to Chief of Xenopsychology after the war. Her job was to help other species understand human behavior and help humans understand alien thinking. It was harder than fighting the Korthic had been. She was working on her latest report when Captain Tony Rodriguez knocked on her door. Tony was now in charge of training the new integrated defense units. Doc, I need help, he said, sitting down heavily. These alien recruits, they don't get it. Yesterday, I was explaining tactical flexibility to a group of crystalline officers. When I described a scenario where they might need to disobey orders to save civilians, 3 of them fainted. Lisa nodded. It's not their fault, Tony. Their entire concept of civilization is based on absolute obedience to authority. The idea that individual conscience might override orders is terrifying to them. But how do we teach them to fight like humans if they can't think like humans? We don't, Lisa said simply. We teach them to fight like themselves, but with human principles. She pulled up her research on the main display. Look at this. Each species has natural advantages. Zephyrians are incredibly fast and have perfect coordination. Vorthons can process tactical information faster than any human. Crystalline beings can interface directly with ship systems. So we don't need them to be human. We need them to be the best versions of themselves, fighting for something bigger than just survival. The real test came when new threats appeared on the galactic rim. Not the Korthik this time, but something else. Something that called itself the Devourer Fleet. The first reports came from the far edge of the galaxy. Entire star systems were going dark, not destroyed, but consumed. Their stars were being harvested for energy. Their planets were being stripped of all matter. President Karen Hill called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The meeting was different from the old days. Humans were no longer asking for permission. They were giving orders. The Devourer Fleet will reach the core systems in 18 months, Karen announced to the assembled delegates. We have that long to prepare. Ambassador Kethra of the Zephyrians spoke up. Perhaps we should negotiate with them? Find out what they want. They want everything, replied Admiral Susan Grant. They're not conquerors like the Korthik. They're harvesters. They consume entire civilizations to fuel their expansion. The room fell silent. Finally, Elder Vash of the Crystalline Hegemony asked the question everyone was thinking. Can we stop them? Susan looked around the room. With the old way of thinking? No, with separate fleets and individual species fighting. Alone? We'd lose in weeks. Then what do you propose? Total integration. Every species contributes their strengths. Every fleet follows unified command. Every soldier fights not just for their own people, but for the galaxy. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Some species wanted to run. Others wanted to surrender. A few talked about building fortress worlds and hoping the Devourers would pass them by. But the smaller species, the ones humans had saved during the Korthik War, spoke with one voice. The Novans, the Helix people, the Wanderer clans, and dozens of others stood together. We choose to fight, said Speaker Lana of the Novans. We choose to stand with humanity. The memorial service for the fallen heroes of Helios Station had become an annual event. This year, it was held on the rebuilt station, now called Foster Memorial Base. Beings from across the galaxy attended. They came to honor the 800 humans who had died to save 3 million aliens. But more than that, they came to understand what those deaths had meant. Captain Rachel Green, the sole survivor of the battle, spoke to the crowd. She was older now, with gray in her hair and scars on her face. But her voice was strong. They didn't die because they were brave, she said. They died because they were good. They saw people in danger and chose to act. That's what courage really is. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to do right despite the fear. In the crowd, alien children listened to her words. Many of them had been born after the war. They were growing up in a galaxy where sacrifice for others was seen as heroic, not insane. The first integrated defense exercise took place in the Centauri system. Ships from 12 different species worked together under human command. It was messy and chaotic, and sometimes dangerous. But it worked. Captain Bill Scott, commanding the mixed fleet, watched as Zephyrian fighters used their speed to cover Vorthon heavy cruisers. Crystalline ships shared their sensor data in real time with human vessels. For the first time in galactic history, different species were truly fighting as one. All units, this is Fleet Command, he broadcast. Remember, we're not just defending territory. We're defending the idea that different peoples can work together. We're defending the right of everyone to live free. The response came back in 12 different languages, but the meaning was the same. Understood, sir? We are ready. When the Devourer fleet finally arrived, They found something unprecedented in their millions of years of existence. They found a galaxy that fought back. As one, the battle was fierce and terrible. Ships were lost. Heroes died. But for every vessel the galaxy lost, they destroyed 2 of the enemy. The Devourers had never faced coordinated resistance before. They had expected to find scattered, frightened civilizations fighting alone. Instead, they found Unity. Admiral Jake Morrison coordinated the defense from his flagship, the UES Defiance. Around him, officers from a dozen species worked together like they had been born to it. The Zephyrian tactical officer called out enemy positions. The Vorthan communications specialist relayed orders in 6 languages at once. The crystalline navigator calculated jump coordinates that would put them exactly where they needed to be. All fleets, Mrs. Morrison, execute Plan Gamma. Show them what happens when the galaxy stands together. The response was immediate. Human. Ships performed their signature kamikaze runs, but this time they were covered by Zephyrian fighters. Vorthan heavy cruisers provided supporting fire, while crystalline vessels jammed enemy communications. The Wanderer clans used their ancient knowledge of hyperspace to appear behind enemy lines. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers retreated. The victory celebration was broadcast across the galaxy. But the real victory was not the military one. It was what the galaxy had become. Dr. Lisa Harper published her final report on the transformation of galactic civilization. The title was simple: How Fear Became Hope. In it, she explained how the galaxy had learned the difference between peace and strength. The old civilization had been built on control and fear. The new one was built on cooperation and courage. The humans taught us that being civilized was not about avoiding conflict, she wrote. It was about choosing what to fight for. They showed us that real strength comes from protecting others, not just yourself. The report became required reading in schools across the galaxy. Children learned about the human concept of sacrifice. They learned that sometimes doing the right thing required personal cost. Most importantly, they learned that different species could work together if they shared common values. Captain Tony Rodriguez, now a general, established the first galactic military academy. It was built on the ruins of a Korthik hive ship, turned into a symbol of what unity could accomplish. The academy taught tactics and strategy, but it taught something more important. It taught honor. It taught the idea that soldiers serve something greater than themselves. The first graduation ceremony included cadets from 38 different species. They took their oath together, promising to defend not just their own people, but all people. I swear to stand between darkness and light, they said in unison, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to serve the galaxy, not for glory or gain, but because it is right. As the years passed, the galaxy settled into its new reality. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was different now. Decisions were made based on principles, not politics. The strong protected the weak, instead of exploiting them. Humanity's role had evolved too. They were no longer the newcomers asking foe.